Fiat currency as it relates to silver and gold. Now that's a topic which I know is going to split some opinion, and even more so when I tell you that ultimately there's no difference between this plastic banknote worth £50 and this silver coin worth approximately £50 as well. It's just the same concept. We as society attribute value to this and this in kind of an equal way right now. So what's the point in even stacking silver if it's exactly the same as fiat currency? Hello everybody, Backyard Bullion here, and a warm welcome to you all joining me for another precious metal ramble. Now today I want to talk about the relationship between fiat currency and gold and silver. These pieces of paper or plastic, depending where you are in the world, are just promissory notes. There you can see that famous phrase, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £50. This is just something that we as a society, as a civilization, have attributed some value to, and we hold it very dear. And a lot of times you see the reasons why people would want to buy silver and gold in the first place is to exit that system, is to take your money away from fiat currencies, from numbers on a screen in a bank account that will inflate away to nothing, or this stuff tucked away in a sock under your bed, which will ultimately be pretty close to worthless, say in 100 years. People say that silver and gold will be the thing that is most valuable in that time period. Now, my premise for you here today is that ultimately there are some very stark similarities between how we as society attribute value to silver and to fiat currencies, in fact to gold as well, and why it's not necessarily as easy and cut clear as you think to just replace all of your cash with silver or gold. So I hope you enjoy this thought-provoking video as we go throughout it. The whole reason I make these is to get the brain juices flowing and to establish a bit of a fun discussion down in the comments. So please feel free to comment with your thoughts and opinions down below, and hit the like button if you're enjoying, and if you want to see videos like this in the future, then hit subscribe. Now, this whole premise that basically fiat currency and gold and silver are the same thing is, I think, quite a difficult one for a lot of stackers to really understand and appreciate. Ultimately, they really are just the same thing. We attribute value to this piece of plastic and say it's worth £50. We can go out and we can buy £50 worth of stuff with it. In fact, this is a great little example because these right here, these Queen's Piece Completers, granted premiums might be a little higher, they're worth about £50. They're 2 ounces worth of silver. With the premiums that are attached to things right now, you could probably buy one of these for £50 if you found it. So they have an approximate similar value. The big difference here is that over time, this £50 note will buy you less stuff because inflation is the big bugbear that we all have right now. However, the idea is that this stuff here, silver, in whatever form it is, will grow in that value over time. It will be worth more than £50 in the future, and you'll be able to then maybe exchange it for cash that will buy more stuff. However, there is one big kind of fundamental flaw in this, and that's of course around the fact that it's still pegged to cash. You're still using this stuff to essentially buy cash, and then with the cash, buy things. So ultimately, the idea that you're exiting from the fiat monetary system by using gold and silver is a little bit flawed, because ultimately you're going to have to go back into the fiat monetary system to get most of your stuff. Now, there are a lot of examples of companies and businesses and people out there in this world that will happily take gold and silver as a form of payment. Now, for me as a kind of, as a stacker and as a collector and as a small business owner, would I, should I, could I take payment in silver and gold? Well, the answer to those questions is I have done in the past. I would probably again in the future. However, it is very much dependent on individual circumstances at the time. Am I likely to go and buy some gold and silver at some point in the future? Yeah, probably. So why not just have it as payment right now? And it's all, of course, down to cash flow and when and where you want to look to buy things, of course. But ultimately, this practicality of spending your gold and silver in this modern world is very restricted. A lot of people think that it might not be. And granted, there are some states in the US where it's a lot more common, and you can often pay your local contractor with this stuff because he's a gold and silver bug. It's a much more common thing to find in, for example, the US. But there are, of course, these really kind of hidden impracticalities for silver and gold in this modern world, and it's not to be ignored. A lot of people kind of feel that it's the best thing to do, but I mean, let's be quite honest, you're not going to pop down to the shops with your silver and buy most of your groceries with it. You're not going to go to the big the big superstores out there in this world and buy your groceries with silver and gold. There are, of course, the exceptions where there are people who've got these silver coins which are denominated by a certain pound denomination, and they've bought them for less than that, and they can spend them as fiat cash. It's a really kind of grey area on that side. Not really something I want to go into too much more detail on, but ultimately the premise of using gold and silver in a modern day society is a little bit it's possible, but it's really not very practical. Now, where I do see some value, of course, in gold and silver, and it's impossible not to see the value in it, is when there's some kind of crisis. Now, I have been very critical of gold and silver in the past where, if there is a humanitarian crisis, and boy, we've seen some of those in the recent past, gold and silver in that immediate moment is not necessarily going to help you. In fact, it's probably going to actually do more damage than good in that short term. However, if you can get through those, those real difficult moments, those first absolute chaos times, then gold and silver is a way to transport your wealth through that particular crisis. But it's the same premise as, the sinking Titanic and the rich man throwing wads of cash to get and buy his place on a lifeboat. If the likelihood is that you're all going to die anyway, or the guy that's taking the cash has already resigned himself to the fact that he's not going to get on the lifeboat, he's going to get everyone else to safety, then you can have as much cash and as much gold and as silver as you like. It's not going to make the slightest bit of difference. So it really is, this kind of concept that silver and gold is this auto-win situations, auto-win in a scenario is not necessarily true. However, it does hold this humongous value going forward. Now, as a barter kind of tool, it is wonderful, and that's one of the reasons why we as society have used gold and silver throughout history, because it is this happy medium for people. If your neighbour has got some grain and you are the one that has the cows, of course you want to have the grain to feed your cows, but how do you, what do you pay your farmer? What do you pay the guy with the grain with? Perhaps he needs to get some fresh water, and you've got a spring on your land. You do this exchange, and it can be quite complicated. How much water do you give for the grain? And it's very difficult to know. And that's why we have these mediums of trade, these currency items. And throughout history, that's been gold and silver. And I do think that in a post-apocalyptic kind of world, that gold and silver potentially would be this mainstay again, because it is real, physical, it will last, it's not going to just be burnt up in a fire. Although, to be fair, if there was a big old fire in your house, the chances are that the vast majority of your stuff would be quite badly damaged and quite badly burnt, and maybe even melted as well. But the point here is that it's durable, it's enduring, it will last longer than bits of paper and plastic. So the whole premise that we can maybe use gold and silver in a barter economy again, yeah, I get that. I completely understand that. One of the big things that I have a bugbear with about, though, in comparison with gold and silver and the future of using gold and silver instead of fiat currency, just simply comes down to the volume of it that's around at the moment. So you've just got to look at the world and just see how different it is compared with like the sort of late 1800s, where we had the height of the gold standard, where countries around the world pegged the value of their currency against gold, and it was a happy medium. Countries around the world were very happy to do that. There was ease of international trade, finally, no messy currencies needing to be exchanged and moved around. It was just this one happy medium for gold. And the idea that the world could return to a gold standard, I think, is long gone past now. We certainly wouldn't use gold again, I think, for this gold standard. There's just no, there's a lot of talk about the US, for example, returning to the gold standard. That's never going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And if they did just return to their own individual gold standard, they would be very much hindering themselves in terms of what they can do as a nation, internationally, in terms of trade, and also in terms of domestic, growth, and just everything about gold standard is restrictive in terms of managing and running a country. It's very, very impossible to do. But if everybody did it, then yeah, it could happen, and it could be this new way of trade. But I do think that now, in this world that we are in, the world is just so different to how it was in the 1800s and the early 1900s, that we would in fact see something modern, something like, well, everybody's favorite thing, it would be these central bank digital currencies. That's, I think, what's going to happen. I think you're going to end up with these digital kind of currencies, these cryptocurrencies from central banks, and that will be ultimately the thing that people will have to live with as this new modern kind of gold standard, so to speak, this digital standard. A lot of people don't like the idea of this because it will be, of course, very intrusive. It will be very trackable, traceable. There will be this blockchain of every single transaction for every dollar and pound that's spent throughout history. And that's not something that people like the idea of. But ultimately, we live in this world right now where there are easy ways of tracing and traceability for pretty much everything that we do with money these days. I mean, I've got here cash on the table, but it's not often now that we use cash in modern day societies. Certainly when you're buying gold and silver, I don't feel like there's been a time, other than perhaps at a coin fair a couple of years ago, where I've used cash to buy gold and silver, and even then it wasn't in particularly large volumes. Talking sort of a couple of silver coins really, or these, maybe 100 quid's worth of silver. So it's really an impractical kind of thing to maybe think about, that you can just use cash to avoid being tracked in the system. But nowadays, whether you like it or not, I feel that every transaction is tracked. Every, bank's transfer that you make is trackable and traceable. Every credit card payment you make and every debit card transaction you do ultimately will have this paper trail to it. So the idea of being able to take your money out of the system completely, and you get the jokes, you get the people saying, "Oh, I've bought all this gold and silver, but I lost it in a boating accident." Come on, that's, if the world really came to it, and you've seen it in certain countries like Turkey, where they're trying to reclaim all the gold from their citizens. If it really came to it and somebody knocked on your door and was like, "Excuse me, you've got this credit card history here of buying $20,000 worth of gold. Can I have it, please?" If the government really did come knocking on your door to reclaim all of that gold, good luck saying that it fell off the edge of your boat. That's all I'm going to say. The premise here is, though, that gold and silver, I think, has got value, and I don't want to sound overtly negative on it. I do think that it is worth having. Of course I do, because I've got a bunch of it here. But ultimately, it is for a different purpose. It is for this, wealth guarantee over time. So the difference that I see, the difference that makes the difference for me is, this plastic stuff that we have here is ultimately just going to reduce in its buying power over time. And that's ultimately what you're looking at right now. So the buying power of gold and silver right now is approximate to what fiat currency is, because it's an exchange mechanism. You put your cash into gold and silver, you take your cash, or you take gold and silver out into cash, and then you use that to buy things. That's what I use gold and silver for, not as a kind of break the system kind of mantra. It's very much, I'm putting my money into this now, and then at some point in the future, it will come good for me in that particular circumstance, that timing, whatever that might be. If it's 10, 20, 30 years, or even if it's down to the next generation, it will ultimately provide more value for me than having money in a bank account, for example. So it is important to remind you all that this is not financial advice. I'm just a guy who likes to talk about shiny things. But ultimately, I do think it's an interesting concept that we don't really have a distinction between gold and silver as a society. And it is the last thing I want to just remind you all on, that ultimately it's just a piece of metal. No other living creature on this planet attributes value to gold or silver. We are the only ones that do that. We as a society need something to put that value on, to actually make sense of the world, to be able to buy things, to be able to buy that grain to feed your cows. It is a really interesting concept, and one which, it could be anything that we attribute value to. And ultimately, there are a lot of other things in this world that we attribute value to, whether it be nickel or aluminium or all of these other commodities, these things that we use that can be used and put to purpose. We as a society hold a lot of value to them, and gold and silver often are seen as the kings and queens of that world. But the world is changing, and who knows where it will be in the future. So that's my collection of thoughts and opinions on the subject. I'd love to know what you think. It'd be great to hear your comments down below. And if you've enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button. And if you're not subscribed and you want to see videos like this in the future, then make sure you hit that subscribe button, because 70% of all the views I get are not subscribed. So make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next video. As always, please make sure that you like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.